Hey everybody, welcome to week 3 of winter break groups. I hope that you guys are doing well, and I'm glad that you're back for week 3. I have Alyson with us today, and Alyson's going to share with us another one of the values that we have at Christian Challenge. So Alyson, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you're going to be discussing today.
Sweet. Hey Challengeites! Like Trace said, my name is Alyson, and I'm on staff with Christian Challenge. You'll usually find me on stage leading worship and awkwardly giving the announcements to you all. But behind the scenes, I run our social media page and I meet with a few of the female leaders. Today, I've been given the opportunity to speak Jesus' word to you through the interweb.
Okay, so before you jump in, why don't you just remind us, kind of give us an overview of what our goal is in the winter break groups and what we're talking about.
Yes, Trace, Sarah, and I wanted to present a series on what the vision of Christian Challenge is and the core values that align with that vision. Our vision for Christian Challenge is to train students to faithfully follow Jesus. This is at the forefront of everything that we do. It's the direction that we as a ministry are headed. So, if training students to faithfully follow Jesus is our vision, then our values help us to achieve that vision. The 4 main values that we believe will help us train students to faithfully follow Jesus are faithfulness, community, missional living, and training. Last week, Trace spoke on faithfulness and how faithfulness is committing oneself to lean into the things that God has entrusted to us. We know that God has a unique plan for each of us, so to some extent, faithfulness looks different to each of us. But one expectation that encompasses every circumstance is to be faithful with what God lays before you. This week we are looking at our core value of community. The passage that we are going to be looking at as we talk about community is John 13:31 through 35. We're going to be bouncing around here a little bit, but you can make your way there.
So tell us a little bit about what's happening in John 13 while people are turning there. What's the context?
So, context. Jesus has just made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and now he is sitting at a dinner table with 12 of his closest friends, the night before he is crucified. He had just taken turns washing all of his disciples' feet while telling them of the responsibility to serve one another in this same way. When out of nowhere, he makes the announcement that one of his closest friends is going to betray him. Now John, one of his disciples, was reclining at the table next to Jesus when this announcement was made. So he leaned over and he asked Jesus, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus reveals to John that Judas would be the one to betray him. Then Jesus instructs Judas to go and do what he needs to do. The stage for our reading tonight is set just as Judas gets up and leaves the room. So, starting in verse 31. When Judas had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him at once." So at the very moment when Judas leaves to set the final betrayal in motion, Jesus says, now is the Son of Man glorified. What a profound statement. I bet that no one is more amazed at this statement than John. Why John? Because John was the disciple that had leaned over to Jesus and asked, "Who, Lord? Who is going to betray you?" John was the one at that point who knew who the betrayer was, Judas. And John was the one who knew what was happening when Judas got up to leave the room. Judas was going to betray Jesus. And it's only after Judas leaves the room that Jesus is speaking of glory now. In what must have been one of the most emotionally confusing and charging moments of John's life, the next thing he hears from Jesus is a command to love. So, John 13:33. "Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So here's a run through of everything John has just heard, probably within a 5-minute time span. 1. Betrayal has been put in motion. 2. The glory of God is about to be seen. 3. Jesus will be leaving them. And while John's heart is bursting with all those conflicting emotions, Jesus leaves the disciples with a command of how they are to live life without him there. This is the command that he gives. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. Jesus states that in his absence, love for each other is to bind them together and bind them to him. This moment in John's life must have been so profound, so moving, and so memorable that it left its mark years later, not only on the writing of this story, but on his entire first epistle. In 1 John, John ponders very deeply the phrase, my disciples. And what he concludes is that to be a true disciple, you must be born again. To be a disciple of Jesus Christ is not just to be outwardly aligned with a Christian church or a Christian movement or a Christian name. Being a disciple of Christ is to be miraculously changed by the Spirit into a person with a new heart, full of love for the Father, love for Jesus, and love for the followers of Jesus. A true test of your discipleship to God is the testimony of your love for God's people. The two go hand in hand. We cannot love God yet despise his people. We cannot have relationship with God yet resist relationship with his people. The two are joined together. They are inseparable. John states these conclusions countless times in his first epistle. In 1 John 4:7, he says, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever has been born of God knows God. 1 John 3:14 says, We know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. 1 John 3:10, By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. 1 John 4:8, Anyone who does not love God does not know God, because God is love. 1 John 2:9-10, Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light. Or, as Jesus says in John 13:35, By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. People will know that you have truly trusted Jesus as your personal Savior if it is evident that you have a deep love for the people who follow him.
So, one question I have about John 13. Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he says, A new commandment I give you. But we have in the Old Testament a set of laws about how Israel was to love God and love their neighbor. So loving their neighbor was important to them as well. So what makes Jesus' commandment new, and what makes his love new?
Well, 1 John 2:8 says, It is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. In other words, what makes this love new is that it is the arrival of the glory of the Lord, and it is the arrival of the light of the world, the light that will one day fill the earth as the waters cover the sea. When the Messiah comes and brings his kingdom, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Jesus is indeed the Messiah. He is the light of the world. In verse 31, Jesus tells us that this is the night the Son of Man would be glorified, and God glorified in him. Jesus tells us that this is the night the light would shine most brightly, when Jesus lays down his life for his friends. So the thing that makes the disciples' love for each other new is that they are not just copying this light, but they are in this light. They are in the love of Jesus. The commandment for us to love each other just as Jesus loved was not mainly a command for imitation, but it was an invitation for participation. When we love each other in obedience to the new commandment, we are loving each other with the love of Jesus. His love is being perfected in our love. This is not an imitation game, but it's a manifestation of Jesus in our life. Our lives are in Jesus. Our lives are in the light, and our love is his love.
So at the beginning, you said you're going to talk about community, this value that we have of community. So how does everything you just talked about in John 13 translate into a core value that we have of community?
Well, in John 13, Jesus makes it clear that he longs for us to love the people around us, and we know what that love looks like when we look at the way that Jesus lived his life with his disciples. He spent intentional time with them by inviting them into ordinary life with himself. He asked them purposeful questions. He prayed with them. He ate with them. He served with them as well as for them. His life was an outpouring of love. He invites us into that same rhythm with our own lives. At Christian Challenge, we work hard to provide opportunities for people to meet together because we recognize the emphasis Jesus had on loving the community around him. We provide small groups to help display what meaningful community should look like. People praying together, confessing together, and growing together for the glory of God. We provide weekly meetups so that people can come together under one roof, praising Jesus for his work in their lives and realigning their values with his values through the reading of Scripture together. We offer times of fellowship after service with hot cocoa, popsicles, and in past times, pancakes, so that people aren't just showing up to be fed and then they leave, but so that people are showing up to be real. We want every person who steps foot in our ministry to engage with the people around them in authentic ways. We also work hard to plan fun things for our community to do together. Things like the barn dance, fall retreat, missional communities, the pumpkin patch, the winter formal. Providing outlets for fun is important to fuel a healthy balance of coffee and content. We do all these things in hopes that individuals would see value in being a part of community that exists to honor God.
Yeah, I think that's helpful for understanding that, a lot of the things that we do them for a reason. There's a reason we gather on Thursday nights and a reason we have hot cocoa and pancakes when it's not COVID. There's a reason we do small groups. There's a reason why we do stuff like the pumpkin patch. And the reason we do those things is because we value community. So we want students at Challenge to feel like they have a community here. But we also want more than that for students, don't we?
Yes. So our goal with Christian Challenge is to train students to faithfully follow Jesus. Not just now, but for the rest of their lives. And part of this training is getting students to recognize the absolute necessity of having community in their lives. We are passionate about this. This is why Trace, Sarah, and I are so big on making sure individual students are getting involved with a local church. It does not have to be our church, but it does need to be a church. If you are going to fulfill God's commandment of loving the people of God, that means that you need to get involved with the people of God. We don't want Challenge to be the end-all, be-all for our students. Why? Because Challenge is only for a season. It's 4 short years maybe, and then it's done. What good would this ministry be if we trained you to live faithfully for 4 years, and then the fruit of your training ended after that? We long for students to press into the discipline of committing to a local church now, so that they will know that they still have a place to belong and people to love when Challenge is over. The most effective way to train is with training partners. If you find that you don't have people walking alongside you in faith and love, why is that? Our ministry is devoted to the health and growth of the local church. Are you invested in one? If not, why? We believe that God has a grand and eternal purpose for the church, and as members of the church, we seek to work together in love and in unity. Do you choose to invest in genuine, loving relationships that spur one another to continue to follow Jesus? If not, how can you get started? You guys are involved in a small group, which is amazing. That is one big first step in the right direction. My challenge for you is to take it a step beyond that. Ask someone in your group to hang out for coffee and get to know them. Put what you learn to practice by taking the initiative on your own.